This is the European History Lecture for Monday, the 13th of September, 2021. We have already gone over your Baker quiz for Chapter 13, and you've taken it, scored it. Once you got yours back, make sure you all did this, have returned it to the shelf. You have not taken it, because if I don't have it, I can't give you a grade, and therefore it's 0. And now I am handing back homework, and I have given you an exemplar. The exemplar contains 2 done Chapter 12 surveys. Now, there's one on the front and back page, and there is one on the, Fiona? Where are you? Anton? There you go. And there is one on the 2 middle pages. Exemplar is a fancy word for an example.
Oh, great.
History's funny that way. Ava, where are you? There you go. Okay. What you see is, and I shouldn't be talking over, examples of what I consider to be A+ work at this point in the year for chapter surveys. Are these perfect? No, they're not perfect. But they do show the sorts of qualities that I want your chapter surveys to have. And by giving you 2 examples, I'm trying to give you a notion of what it is. Ellie, Morosco? Okay. First off, how do I grade? Some of you know this, some of you do not. Here. I have a blind left eye, thanks to eye surgery that I had when I was an infant to correct being born cross-eyed. The surgeon sliced my optic nerve almost completely through on the left eye side. As a result, my eyesight is 2400 on in my left eye, which is legally blind. Therefore, I can see vague movement here. I have a blind spot here, and it really is of secondary. It's just like having peripheral vision on my entire left side. My right eye also requires corrective lenses, so it's not like I have perfect eyesight on my right. Ava, where are you? Okay. As such, I am not a fast reader. My wife is an incredibly fast reader. Without speed reading, she can just absorb a book like a sponge absorbs ocean water. In my case, I have to pick and choose what I read so that I am not giving myself purgatory because of the homework I assign to you. So, this is how I grade homework. I randomly choose 2 or 3 things to look at on your assignments. These things can change week by week. They do change week by week. They can change class period by class period. What I do is I look at these 2 or 3 things, and I then allude to the quality of the rest of your work. So, by reading 1 or 2 answers, I get a sense of the quality of those answers, and that's the grade you get for the entire work. Now you might say, but what if, Emma? Yeah. But what if I do a lousy job on the 2 or 3 sections that you have graded, and the rest is wonderful? And I will say, that's a shame, but that's the way it is. Do a good job on everything. Have a consistently high quality, and you won't have to worry about that. Ellie?
No?
Yeah. Okay. Well, great bite. It's the damn masks. Let's see. So, what if you look at these 2 things and you say, but you're just grading for volume. If someone writes a great volume of information in small letters, they're going to get a better grade than somebody who doesn't. To which I'll say, yeah, I do. But here's the validity in it. I am looking for a certain scale of answer, a certain size with a certain amount of detail. You have a limited amount of space, and in that space, you are to provide me with your rationale, your details, basically your answer. So, if you give me a short answer that is not to the scale I want, it's like giving me a sandwich when I'm expecting a full-scale dinner. Please use these examples and your own common sense to craft answers that are in proportion to the questions and the level of detail that I am looking for. If you do that, you should be fine. Now, if you feel that your work has been unfairly judged, you should come and talk to me, not during class, but during study lab is the ideal time. There are other times as well. Here's what you should not do. Do not come in hot and angry. What are you doing giving me a grade like this, huh? To which I will respond by kicking you the hell out, making your grade even worse, and probably engaging in some kind of formal or informal discipline, because you don't talk to people like that, even when you're angry. What I recommend is that you come to me with some humility and certainly with proper decorum and manners, and you say, Mr. Genorio, I'm sorry, as I was looking this over, I saw this. You don't need to kowtow. You don't need to cringe. You don't need to do any of that. You simply need to be straightforward, polite, and I will take what you have to say seriously. If I don't agree with your reasoning, I will tell you why. If I discover that you've pointed out something to me that I neglected, I'll change your grade. But it has to be done in the right way, which means politely, in a straightforward fashion, and without pathos. I think that's it. So you've got your homework back, you've got your grades for that, you've got your Chapter 12 quizzes back, you can rewrite wrong answers for half credit on a separate sheet of paper, staple it to the front, and return it within the next few weeks, and your grade will certainly go up. Are there any questions about the homework, about the way I grade, or anything of that kind? I see no questions. Most of you have had me before, therefore most of you understand my approach. If you have not, and something strikes you as unusual, please come talk to me about it. I would rather talk about it than not. I would rather you understand where I'm coming from in regards to the grading. And yeah, grading essays and grading parts of essays is absolutely a judgment call. I'm a seasoned professional. I know what I'm doing in terms of deciding what is an A essay, what is a B essay, and what is an F essay. You have been given as exemplars 2 A+ pieces of work that give you an indication of what I'm looking for. I hope you're able to do it in the future. Good luck. Still no questions? Comments and thoughts? Yes?
So the example doesn't necessarily space, but that's still making sense.
It is, because she did a good job.
Right.
She, he, whoever, it's a she, did a good job. Okay. The other person did a good job too. Let me think. Okay. So, where are we now? I presume that your electronics are in the pockets and that we are ready to go. You have your notes out. The Crusades, bless you, are important for several reasons. You have your notepacks out, everything's back. First of all, in the modern world, you find precious few historians and history teachers who will defend the Crusades as justified, reasonable, or anything other than a war crime. I happen to be one of them. After losing the Christian Syrian, Judean, Egyptian, Cyrenaican, Tripolitanian, Tunisian, Algerian, Mauritanian, Portuguese, and Spanish territories to Islam and to particularly Islamic holy war, the Christian world still takes a few hundred years to fight back. Only in Spain is La Cruzada, the crusade, begun immediately because the majority of Iberia, Spain and Portugal, should I say, are under Moorish rule or under Muslim rule. The Muslims try to do the same thing and are only knocked back at the Battle of Tours in France, in the early Middle Ages, by Charles Martel, Charles the Hammer. Had the Franks lost the Battle of Tours, it's entirely likely that Christendom would have been wiped out, and we would simply be the northwest fringes of the Islamic world. Our Christian Western civilization was saved, and still, it isn't until after the Norman conquest of England, because of an entreaty by the Byzantine Empire, that the Christians engage in holy war. Islamic holy war jihad is practiced from Muhammad to me throughout the entire history of the last 1400 years, consistently and constantly. Over 80% of the conflicts on earth involve Muslims in one way or another. This propensity to holy war is something that was exemplified by the life of the Prophet Muhammad. It is not something that Muslims apologize for. Christianity does not engage in crusading, except in Spain, until the late 1000s AD. It is a limited strike of noblemen's second and third sons going through the Byzantine Empire with a limited goal to free the Holy Land, that is the area that we now would call Israel, the area around the city of Jerusalem. This experiment has some success at various times, and it also has many failures. This experiment includes the epic battles between the Kurdish general Saladin leading the Islamic forces against Richard Lionheart, King of England, leading the Christian forces. And if you want to understand some interesting military history, study those battles. But the Crusades then become seedy. A Crusader army in one of the later Crusades is persuaded by the Venetians, the shipmasters of Venice, while being transported from Italy, to stop and crusade by rebuilding the Venetian Empire in Dalmatia and in Greece and on the eastern shores of the Adriatic Sea in general terms. And they agreed. So crusading includes rebuilding a mercantile empire for an Italian city-state. Moreover, a group of crusaders welcomed as allies into the city of Constantinople decides to sack it, raping, stealing, murdering fellow Christians, because the city of Constantinople, since Constantine built its walls, had not been sacked. And there was beaucoup booty in Constantinople as a result. Constantinople, Christian Constantinople, was never the same since the sacking by the Crusader Knights. If that wasn't demoralizing enough to a Christian who actually believed in crusading, the Children's Crusade, where a bunch of wild-eyed, starry-eyed idealists decided that waging war for faith was wrong, but waging peace would work. As such, they got beautiful children and adolescents and taught them the ways of peaceful persuasion and placed these innocents on Venetian ships to cross the Mediterranean and land in the Middle East and wage peace with the Muslim. Many of the ships just went to the slave markets of Tripoli and Tunisia and sold those kids to the highest bidder. And trust me, there is a racial element to this. Getting blonde-haired, blue-eyed, red-haired, freckle-faced, green-eyed European kids was appealing to a certain type of bastard. Yes, that's the term. Bad man. Many of these children were sold into the kind of slavery that still exists, sex slavery. Those that reached the Middle East also were immediately enslaved. It was a disaster on every level. With the expulsion of the Mongols from the Middle East, which had been distracting the Islamic world, the Crusader Knights are driven out of the Middle East, at latest at Acre or Acre, about 100 years, 150 years after they first landed. The Crusaders never returned. So, before the Black Death, the Crusades in the Middle East are largely over. And yet, today's progressive woke professors feel the need to rack themselves and writhe in shame over the horror show that was Christian holy war, without any context, simply to expiate their white guilt. It's a problem. History really has its own lessons. You do not have to superimpose your own ideology onto the history. I reveal my conservatism so that you understand from whence you are hearing your information, so that you can take it into account. I don't pretend to be capable of objectivity. I simply try to be objective. It is an ongoing aspiration that any good historian and good teacher of history would try to do. But to use the Crusades as part of an argument in contemporary politics, as an example of how evil the West is, without taking into account the fact that Islamic jihad still goes on, has never been repudiated, has never even been something that Muslims feel the slightest bit of guilt about as a culture, that is out of context. That is a false read of history, in my judgment. You look into it yourself and make up your own mind. With the failure of the Crusades, there is a change in European culture, because those Crusader Knights who had lived in the Middle East had lived at a higher state of culture, at a higher technology level, at a higher cultural level. Instead of eating buttered turnips all the time, they were able to eat spiced foods. Instead of bathing once or twice a year when they fell into this creek, they were able to bathe in hot water baths, in Roman-style thermae that the Arabs had continued to use and still knew how to design. Instead of wearing curtains as undergarments, linen, they were able to find silk and cotton. Instead of being in drafty, moldy, musty castles, they were able to live in cities that had streetlights, city guards, and libraries. And instead of being treated by barber surgeons who employ leechcraft to suck out the evil humors by slicing your veins open and sticking leeches on them, the Crusader Knights were able to experience the benefits of Arab medicine being the basis of our modern medicine. In every way, our Christian Western civilization was the third world of 1,000 years ago, the benighted backwards region of the cultured area of the planet. China was in decline 1,000 years ago. 1,000 years ago, the Arabic Islamic civilization was at its zenith. That's an Arabic word for high point, and it was the central civilization on the planet, the highest culture on the planet. When those Crusader Knights returned home, they wanted that life. Now, there's an old saying that the universe is composed of three motive powers or elements or forces: matter, energy, and enlightened self-interest. Matter, energy, and enlightened self-interest. The enlightened self-interest of the Crusader Knights said they want the silks and spices, which is a generic catch-all term for the luxuries of the storied East. So, in coming back home, a new trade network, the first long-distance trade network that was engaged in by Western Europeans, since the fall of Western Roman Empire was established. Crusader knights who wanted the silks and spices in northwestern Europe had these shipped overland from the Italian ports of Venice and Genoa, up here near the crotch that is the leg of Italy. Venice and Genoa received the silks and spices from the Mediterranean trade with the cities of Cairo, Egypt, and Damascus, Syria, and others. The marketplaces in Cairo, Egypt, and Damascus, Syria sell to the Christians. How they sell, well, we'll talk about that. The silks and spices that were desired. Jackson, will you name the camera over here, please? Thank you. The silks and spices that were in Cairo and Damascus, Egypt, did not originate from there. The silks came from China. The spices came from what we now call Indonesia, the East Indies. And the spice route was a seagoing trade route from what were the Dutch East Indies, what is now Indonesia, by ship to India, by ship to Cairo up the Red Sea, or Damascus up through the Mesopotamian region of the Middle East. And then they're sold to Europe, the traders from Venice and Genoa, and then they are brought to Northern Europe by land caravan. Silks come from China, and they come across a land route through Central Asia called the Silk Road. Now, let's look at we're going to look more closely at this later. Thank you. But you should understand that this long-distance trade route, which is sparked, thank you, by the craving for a better material standard of living, sparked by the different and better lifestyle that the Crusader Knights experienced in the Middle East, is going to change the world. It's going to be one of those things that leads to the end of the Middle Ages and the dawn of modern times. So simply remember that craving. Now, there are other crusades, and I will talk about these later. So we're on to item F, Foxtrot, the Teutonic Knights, and the Northern Crusade. In northeastern Europe, this is before the rise of Muscovy, which will become Russia. Eastern Europe is dominated by the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. The Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth is an exception to many of the rules of the Middle Ages and of the early modern period. It is massive, containing land that is now part of Germany, Russia, the Ukraine, Moldova, Lithuania, Belarus, but there are two groups that had not yet Christianized by about 900 years ago, by the dawn of the 13th century, by around the year 1200. The Prus and the Lithuanians. The Prus were a swamp people of what is now the southeastern corner of the Baltic Sea, which had been called Prussia. Not Russia, Prussia. The Lithuanians were partnered with the Poles, but the Lithuanians, while they had some clans that were Christian, did not have all. Understand that in the Middle Ages, the requirement for joining Christian Western civilization was to become Christians. The Vikings and the Magyars had come 1,000 years ago, 1,200 years ago, 1,300 years ago. The Vikings, pagan Scandinavians. The Magyars, pagan horsemen from Central Asia. The Magyars become accepted into European society when they Christianize as Hungarians. The Vikings become accepted into European society when they become Christian. And they also, when they become Christian, become less predatory to their neighbors. Christianity does tend to make people more genteel, more peaceful. the Polish king has a problem with the Prus, in particular, with the Prussians. And there are a bunch of second and third son nobility in Germany that want a purpose. So the King of Poland invites the Pope to declare a great northern crusade to Christianize the Prus. An order of knights is gathered and recruited in Germany called the Teutonic Order. That is the German order. Teutonic means German. The Teutonic Knights begin to establish castle colonies in the swamplands of Prussia. In a war lasting several hundred years, the Teutonic Knights become a power unto themselves. They gather Prussia under their rule. They march north through Lithuania into what is now Latvia and Estonia. They are moving towards Novgorod in Russia. The Teutonic Knights have connections to the Kingdom of Sweden across the Baltic. They have connections to the Holy Roman Empire, where they mostly come from, and they have connections to Poland. Now, various kings of Poland regret the calling of the Great Northern Crusade because the Prussians, who are Christianized by the Teutonic Knights don't really listen pliantly and obediently to the Kingdom of Poland. They see themselves as an independent nation. And because they see themselves as independent of Poland, they largely go their own way. And the Polish soon realize that they've actually lost the territory of Prussia in terms of practical control. Roberta, I don't want to put you on the spot, but I know that you come from Lithuania. You may have an insight into these histories that I don't. I'm skimming. I'm going very superficially. But if you have anything to say about this from your knowledge, I'd love the class to hear it. Are you interested in saying anything or not?
Not yet.
Not yet. Okay. I could take that and assume that you think I'm doing a good job, but that would be egomaniacal. I'll just assume that you don't have anything to say yet. If and when you do, please raise your hand. History is in the interpretation, and I imagine that your interpretations will differ from mine in many respects. But we'll see. Does anyone actually have any questions, comments, or thoughts on any of the things I've talked about before we move forward? To probably the most consequential small crusade most of you have never heard of. So no questions on Prussia. By the way, the heart of what will become the German Empire, the heart of what will become German culture, the heart of what will become German militarism, which leads to World War I and World War II, comes from the Teutonic Order of Knights. So the Great Northern Crusade has cast a mighty shadow over recent history, because the spirit of those Teutonic Knights lived on in the Prussian and then German armies, especially in World War I and even into World War II. We'll talk a lot more about that. Now we come to it. Something that is going to really, really shape late Middle Ages into the Renaissance, and it will shape the Protestant Reformation. It's called the Albigensian Crusade. Up here near the Massif Central of France, a hill country in southern France, a group of free-thinking knights and priests and nuns began to percolate ideas of building a new society, a society purified of the evils of the medieval world, which includes serfdom, which condemns a vast majority of the population to servitude and bondage in the fields, and a wealthy church and family wealth that locks everything up. All of that is going to be denied. The leaders of the Albigensian Crusade call themselves, or the Albigensians, call themselves Cathari. Cathari for the word purified. They consider themselves to be the purified. And these Cathari, in a momento, these Cathari, these purified leaders of the Albigens, are going to build God's new Israel right here, right now. Yes?
How do you spell Cathari?
Cathari. Cathari. First of all, property, money, ownership is the root of much evil. They aspire to a communitarian ownership of everything. In other words, they're proto-socialists or communists in the sense that they want to eliminate private property. Instead, they want the resources to be run in common and used in common. So, the elimination of private property, number one. Number two, the elimination of family identity. The feudal age is based in one principle, which I've told you about. You are what your daddy does. So your family heritage determines your destiny. What if we eliminate that? What if we have the community or the village raise all children? What if, with the exception of the mother, who everyone knows who it is, the father's identity no longer matters? She could have had sex with any number of men. But whoever's father doesn't matter. Because we in the Albigensians, we of the Cathari, believe that all children should be raised in common by the community because they are all our children. Hierarchical church, gone. Every one of us is a brother and a sister. So, all the Albigensians are doing is challenging the very foundation of human civilization in the West. Get rid of property, get rid of family identity, get rid of the church. What do we have? Everyone caring and sharing and singing their version of French Kumbaya to the world. However, it's not all sweetness and pacifism, because the old order will not die easily. So the Albigensians spread as a peasant revolt, which is one of those things that plagues medieval society. Every so often, the rural poor, the peasants and serfs and slaves, will rebel. And usually what happens is the peasants spread their power, burning noble houses, killing noble men, women, and children, burning churches and cathedrals, killing priests, monks, and nuns. But eventually they destabilize and fall apart because they don't have any clue how to organize, because they are completely uneducated. What you have in a peasant uprising throughout most of the Middle Ages is rage personified with the destruction of the old order as the goal. These people have no idea how to build a new and better world. They just want it. But the Albigens, the Cathari, are led by educated knights and priests, some of whom have been to the Middle East. These people do know how to organize. They are capable of planning the basis of an ongoing society. So there is war around the outer edge of the Albigensians as the Cathari spread outward. The local noblemen around this region beg the King of France and the Pope for help. This is a challenge to Christian civilization. In every way possible, these Cathari threaten us, and they threaten our way of life. The King of France and the Pope agree, and a crusade is called in southern France by the Roman Catholic Church. It is called the Albigensian Crusade. The area is sealed off as if you are quarantining a disease. Armies are set up all around the Albigensian region. These armies have orders to destroy the idea. This is not going to be a war with mercy and quarter and rules. This is a war to exterminate an idea that is deadly to Western civilization. The Cathari fight the same way. They are fighting to birth a new world order that will replace the old world order. There can be no peace between the new order and the old. This is all very similar to what Marx will later come up with in his proposition that revolution is indispensable. The armies then begin to close in. Whole villages are wiped out. Sometimes The children are allowed to be taken. Sometimes even they are killed. Knights also, noblemen who are captured, are tortured to death as an example of what happens to those who oppose the new order. In other words, this has all the blood and brutality of the worst two kinds of wars: religious wars and civil wars. The worst in us comes out in a religious war and in civil wars. You combine these two, and you have an alloy, a Reese's peanut butter cup of genuine human misery. One of the people who was a chaplain to the Knights was St. Dominic. He wasn't St. Dominic then. He was simply Dominic. And Dominic saw an entire region of France bloodily depopulated because of mistaken theology. Because churchmen went along with this notion of a Christian communism. After the end of the Albigensian Crusade, the church is going to establish certain ways of doing things so that that will never happen again. This is their goal, to never have this happen again. One of the best things that comes out of the Albigensian Crusade is the Dominican order. St. Dominic founds what he calls the Order of Preachers. They wear black and white robes, and their goal is to teach Orthodox Christian theology. And Orthodox Christian theology, as understood by the Western Christian faith, by the Roman Catholic Church, does not include the destruction of property, the abolition of family, or the elimination of the hierarchical church. Quite the contrary. All of these things are there for a reason in a Christian society. The Dominicans include St. Thomas Aquinas, the greatest philosopher of the late Middle Ages in Europe. They also include those who became the founders of the Holy Inquisition in Italy and France and Spain. And the Inquisition is a court that has a terrible reputation in history. It started out as a teaching institution. Your ideas are heretical. This is why. Do you understand? And if you agree, you recant. You say, I'm sorry, I was wrong, don't listen to what I said. If you disagree, you will be taught the error of your ways, maybe made an example of, maybe tortured, maybe killed. As a heretic, an apostate, a person who has denied their faith and attacked it. Ultimately, the Spanish Inquisition in particular, but the Roman Inquisition also, becomes seen as a travesty of justice, where people are brought and terrorized for having thought crime. In any event, the church is also steeled against reform ideas because the Albigensians, the Cathari, engage in their thinking as a form of reform. And it is this anti-reform bias that the church has that is going to lead to it stonewalling Martin Luther and Luther breaking away. So there are good reasons why the church is not open to a lot of innovation, experimentation, and reform. Because in one case it led to the Albigensians. In other cases it led to the Hussite Wars, which is another peasant rebellion that we'll talk about more a little later. The church begins to equate reformist ideas with rebellion, armed rebellion, and religious and civil war, just like the Albigensian Crusade was. I will conclude with this. No, I'll conclude with this. That's it. So we are done for the day. Connor, you be kind enough, please, to throw that away. Thank you. We are done for the day. You may talk quietly among yourselves, unless you have questions. We have a question. Ms. Curtis.
No, it doesn't
Zip
have
it,
to do
Velasco.
with your lecture. I'm just assuming this is a typo here because you said 16 would do before 15.
No.
Or is that at,
Let me see. Okay.
You did 16 and then 15. Is that purposeful?
Yes, that's purposeful.
Oh.
What we are doing is, let's see, so this is chapter 13. I think we have chapter 14 due next week. Yes?
Yeah.
And then chapter 16, because I teach out of order from the book.
Okay.
Adios. Have a good day.